This video is about a topic called gaslighting. Gaslighting is a common abuse technique that narcissists try to do in situations to feel in control. And if you watch right through to the end of the video, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do if you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to gaslight you. The term gaslighting comes from a play from 1938 called Gaslight, where a husband attempts to convince his wife and other people that she's going crazy. So he wants her to be admitted to asylum so he can take all of her money. And the way that he does this is actually by trying to manipulate her environment in really subtle ways, such as turning the gaslight up and down and deny that he's actually done that. So she starts to question her own mind. This play was turned into a number of different movies, but actually it's only relatively recently that this term has become very commonly used when it's been mentioned in a number of different books. Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. The person who performs gaslighting is attempting to manipulate someone and get them to question their thoughts, beliefs, their environment, and their own reality. And in successful cases of gaslighting, someone may be even pushed to question their own sanity. Essentially, they wonder if they're going crazy or really start to question their own mind. Essentially, they're denying them what they know to be true and what they've seen with their very own eyes. So the person performing the gaslighting starts to sow these seeds of doubt. So someone starts to question their own memory, their own judgment, and their own perception. Of course, gaslighting is not always successful, but it really depends on the power in the relationship. If someone holds all the power in the relationship, they're far more likely to actually be successful in gaslighting. And it really comes down to how the victim actually perceives the person gaslighting them. Do they really rely on that individual? Do they really respect this individual? Do they really need this individual? Are they clinging on to this relationship for whatever reason? Perhaps they depend on this person. I'm going to mention 5 common gaslighting techniques. So the first one is withholding. Withholding is where someone refuses to listen to someone or pretends they don't understand them. So for example, the person might say, I don't have time to listen to this, or you're not making any sense here, I can't understand you. Number 2 is countering. Countering is where an abuser actually denies an event has taken place and introduces new information that never really happened. Number 3 is forgetting or denying. This is where the person doing the gaslighting completely denies that an event has taken place, or they pretend that they've forgotten. Number 4 is diverting. Diverting is when the person completely changes topic so that the individual can't continue speaking about what they were speaking about. And usually this is done in quite a drastic way that completely distracts someone. Often they actually use something that's quite extreme, so the person just completely forgets what they were talking about. An example of this is a client that I had wanted to bring something up with her mother in relation to how her mother's behavior had made her feel. And she very gently approached the topic and said, you know, Mum, when you said this topic or when you brought up this conversation, it upset me. She wasn't being too challenging towards her mum. She just wanted to state how her mum's behavior had made her feel. And her mum out of nowhere says, well, you think that's bad? When I was a child, I was raped. And my client is just so shocked. She's never before in her entire life heard anything about this rape. And it completely denied my client of my client's feelings, minimizing her concerns, because it made my client feel that her concerns were just not very important to compare to what her poor mother had been through. So it was kind of like the mother had stored up this extreme story for any moment where the mother felt that she was perhaps being attacked. And it was just this huge bombshell to drop in a moment. Of course, my client never really felt it was safe ever again to bring up anything about her own feelings, because who knows what her mom might bring up in terms of a bombshell of revelation that will completely distract my client from her own feelings. And really the aim of this technique is to make the person feel like whatever topic they're talking about is really not important. So this diversion technique, while it might not be extreme as that example, it's aimed to completely distract the person from their line of conversation that they're having with the individual. Number 5 is trivializing. So trivializing is basically making someone feel that they're completely overreacting and that their emotions are just not important, that they're having a completely exaggerated emotional response to a situation. So an example of this might be saying, gosh, you're so sensitive, or something that just really minimizes how someone is feeling and makes them feel like actually they might be very sensitive, they might be overreacting in a situation, essentially telling them their feelings are not important. So those are some common gaslighting techniques. There's often overlap between those 5 techniques. They're not essentially completely separate from one another. And just to give a few other examples of gaslighting techniques, another individual that I know had a meeting with someone, and this individual asked about their life purpose. What do you think your purpose is in life? Which could be quite an interesting conversation, but it's the way that it was done and how it made this individual feel was what was wrong with the situation, essentially. So the individual went on to kind of say that they didn't really know what their purpose was, but one thing they were very passionate about was climate change, because they saw this as being a really important thing and one of our biggest problems in the world. And then the individual responded by saying, I don't think that's it. That's not your purpose. Essentially telling them that they know the individual more than the individual even knows themselves. And the individual felt quite bad in this situation. They felt that they were kind of being controlled in this situation and actually being told what to think. They were asked a question, and instead of the person giving them kind of positive affirmation and just making it an enjoyable conversation, the person goes, that's not your purpose. I don't think that's it. And that's quite a narcissistic thing to do. You can't really tell someone what they think. If someone answers a question and says what they think their life purpose is or what they're interested in, that's that person's individual thoughts. How can you possibly deny that from them? And this is the classic narcissist thing to do. They tell people that they know them better than they know themselves. This is a way that narcissists feel in control. They need to hold all the power and all the control in a conversation. Sometimes gaslighting doesn't have to be words, but it can be just a look that someone gives another person, a condescending type of look. An example of this is a client of mine went out to dinner with a male partner that she'd been dating for quite a while, and she ordered some white wine with dinner. They were having some meat for dinner. I think they were ordering a steak, and he looked at her like this was the worst decision she could possibly make. And he was like, white wine? Surely not white wine. Surely you would order red. And it wasn't really the words, it was more just the look. And he was implying that she had made kind of a mistake, or that it was kind of a silly thing that she'd said. And she was describing this situation to me, and she said, it wasn't his words, it was just how his look made me feel. He made me feel so small in that situation that I later went and Googled, is it okay to order white wine with meat, or do you have to have red wine? It made her question her own judgment in this situation. Another lady that I know was reflecting on a relationship she'd had in the past. And what she realized looking back on the relationship was that actually her boyfriend had been stealing money from her on a regular basis. So what would happen when she was in that relationship was that she had money in purses or coat pockets, and whenever she'd return to get the money or to check the money, it was always different amounts that was there, always a bit less than what she was expecting. Now, she always wanted to see the best in her boyfriend at the time because she was in love with him. But when she was later out of that relationship and was able to reflect upon the relationship, she realized that actually she was constantly being stolen from by her very own boyfriend. And she realized that these situations with money just stopped happening when she left that relationship. And it's funny because she really didn't want to question that relationship at the time because she really relied on that relationship. She was very determined to stay in that relationship, but to stay in that relationship meant that she couldn't really question her boyfriend. She really didn't want to believe that it was her very own boyfriend that was stealing from her. And instead, in order to be able to stay in that relationship, she questioned herself. Maybe I forgot how much money was there. Maybe I lost the money. Maybe someone pickpocketed me like a stranger. She really didn't want to place blame on her boyfriend. And it was only when she had chosen to leave that relationship and make that solid decision that she wasn't returning, that she was able to see the situation for what it really was. Her boyfriend had a habit of stealing money from her. Believe it or not, therapists can actually be the one who gaslight their patients. If you think about it, therapists have a lot of permission to give opinions, and they're in a position of power and authority. So therapists have to be really careful about what they say. An example of this is someone that I know who was told that they had borderline personality disorder. Now, this person did not meet the full criteria for borderline personality disorder. They really never, ever met that full criteria. But for whatever reason, perhaps the therapist was quite narcissistic, the therapist told this individual, "You've got borderline personality disorder." They made this very quick assumption when they had just met the client and just started a therapeutic relationship with them. And of course, this person was vulnerable in this situation. They looked up to the therapist, they put their care in the hands of this therapist, and they believed the therapist for a long time that they must have borderline personality disorder because this therapist has assigned that diagnostic label to them. They later kind of figured out that this probably wasn't true, and that maybe while they had some traits of borderline personality disorder, that it went nowhere near meeting the full criteria for the disorder. But you can just see how actually someone being in a position of power can assign a label or an opinion or a diagnosis to someone, and that person can actually take that as being reality, essentially questioning things about themselves. And that's where it can be very dangerous. And therapists have to be really careful about what they say and what diagnostic labels they give to people, essentially not leading people to question themselves. A client of mine was talking about her mother, and when she was growing up as a child, her mother really disliked the in-laws. So from a really young age, my client remembers being like 4, 5, 6 years old and being told, "Your in-laws are bad, horrible people, terrible. We don't like the in-laws, we don't like to visit the in-laws, they're just awful." And because my client was a child, her brain had not developed enough to be able to question this information. And when my client was about 12 years old, she ended up in this dinner situation with the in-laws, having a really good time, having a laugh, really enjoying the company of the in-laws. And it was the first time that she was actually able to question that maybe it was just her mother's perception and her mother's beliefs being forced onto her, rather than it being a case that the in-laws were bad. Because young children will just believe what their parents tell them. Their brains are not developed enough to actually question that information. And it was quite a shock for my client, because she was brainwashed into thinking that these people were awful. And it only happened that she started to see different contrasting information at a certain age. And of course, she realized at this point, maybe my mother actually is not right. Maybe my mother actually thinks of people as being bad when they're not bad at all. And it was quite a shocking situation for this lady to realize that actually her mother's view of the world might be quite a biased view. Often parents, sadly enough, will gaslight people's siblings against them. Your sister is an attention seeker. Your sister is not very smart. You need to constantly help your sister academically because she's not able to do it herself. There's some really strong messages sometimes come from parents that essentially gaslight siblings into believing certain things about their other siblings, and this can really be very unhealthy. Children will very often be gaslit by their very own parents. And children are relying on their parents for beliefs about themselves to be reflected. And sadly enough, parents are in this position of power to be able to feed information to the child about themselves. And often the narcissistic parent is going to feed very inaccurate information to the child, often in moments of rage or jealousy, or in moments where they feel strong negative emotions. They will take it out on their child and make their child feel very bad about themselves. So this might be in statements such as "you're vain," Why are you so obsessed with your image? You're an attention seeker, you're selfish, you're stupid. These "you are" statements. And these poor children are led to believe these things about themselves for a very long time before they actually may question them later. And often people will end up in therapy with these very strong negative beliefs about themselves that they've picked up from their parent who has essentially gaslit them from a very young age. And this is where low self-esteem comes from. Unfortunately, children have often been fed information from their parents that is just not true about themselves. And it's hard to then try and change these beliefs. Of course, it's not impossible. People can do it. But when people have been manipulated in this way from a young age and brainwashed in this way from a young age, it ends up leading to this situation in life where people have formed quite low self-esteem and quite unhealthy ways of viewing themselves. While gaslighting is most commonly seen where one individual is trying to manipulate another, we also see it where an individual manages to manipulate a whole group of people. And we often see this in cults, where a cult leader completely brainwashes a huge group of people. Some people even actually question Donald Trump and say that some of the statements that he has come out with over time have been so drastically inaccurate and proven to be untrue, they've wondered whether he was actually trying to gaslight a huge amount of people. So why do people do it? Why would anyone want to gaslight another person, making them question their own mind, their own reality, their own perception? So we find that narcissists are usually the ones who carry out gaslighting. And why do they do it? Well, they have a very insecure sense of self. Essentially, they have low self-esteem. They don't look like they've got low self-esteem because they speak with such authority and confidence and arrogance, like they know best. But actually, narcissism comes from childhood trauma.
Parenting styles linked to developing narcissistic personality or narcissistic traits are as follows: neglecting the child emotionally, and also a cold, over-controlling, authoritarian parenting. Also overindulging them, such as spoiling them with privilege and possessions and promoting attitudes of entitlement. Or parenting which promotes perfectionism, winning, and toughness from a child. So basically, it's a combination of abuse or neglect, along with behaviours that might make a child feel special or entitled. And this inconsistent parenting is what leads people to develop traits of narcissism. Because of the abusive or neglectful environment, the child receives a message that they're not safe to be vulnerable with other people. So the person feels that they need to wear a mask at all times, which is a psychological defense to feeling vulnerable.
So there's something very inconsistent about the caregiving here. Of course, there might be a nature part to play, that people might be genetically predisposed to develop narcissism, but I really do feel that the environment that someone grows up in has a huge part to play as well. And this is where narcissism comes from. And this is where the individual has to gaslight people in situations because they have to be top dog. They have to be in control in order to maintain this image of themselves as feeling worthy and good enough. Essentially, they have these grandiose ideas of themselves. They have this kind of God complex. And as long as they're in control of other people, as long as they feel in control in social dynamics, in social situations where they feel best, and that they can guide, control, and lead other people, then they can maintain this view of themselves. It's very important for them to try and maintain so that they don't experience this narcissistic wounds. So on a regular basis, they need to feel that they're guiding and leading people and that they're better than other people. And what better way to do this than to put other people down? And that's why gaslighting is something that the narcissist automatically does. They can't help but telling individuals that they don't know themselves very well, that their feelings aren't valid, that they know best, because the narcissist is trying to be a leader. And they're not being a leader in an empathic way, of course, because they lack empathy. They're being a leader, or they're trying to attempt to be a leader by putting other people down. They're trying to elevate their status by putting people down, and that's why gaslighting takes place. And that's why they use gaslighting. It's kind of an obsession with being in control and elevating their own status and feeling better about themselves. They try to control other people by putting other people down. So who are victims of gaslighting? Well, we'll all experience gaslighting in our life because there's always going to be some narcissistic individuals who like to try and take control and tell us things about ourselves. Now, whether we accept these things or not is actually what it comes down to in relation to whether we're going to be a victim or not. So there's a few things that have to happen for us to really be a victim of gaslighting. Usually it's a case of someone being, for whatever reason, stuck in a relationship with someone who's a narcissist. So this might be a child who's got a narcissistic parent. The parent is domineering over them. They can't get away easily, and therefore they have to just accept the words of the parent in order to survive in that situation. We also see gaslighting take place in pretty much every abusive relationship. So pretty much every case of domestic violence, we tend to see gaslighting. This person is very reliant on the individual that they're in an intimate relationship with, and they're constantly being told what to believe, what to think. And we really see this in relationships where one person has a high level of control. So we see gaslighting taking place in relationships that are not very mutual. And sadly, it's people who are most vulnerable tend to be victims of gaslighting. We tend to look at inequalities such as race, immigration status, and gender. And these are indicators that someone might be more vulnerable for being gaslit. A person in an intimate relationship might rely on someone for validation, or they might rely on someone for housing or financial support, and therefore they're constantly on a regular basis the victim of being told what to think, how to perceive things, being told messages about themselves that simply are not true. We often see it, of course, in the workplace as well. And statistically, women are more likely to be the victims of gaslighting because of the history that women have experienced in terms of inequality in relationships and in the workplace. But of course, anyone can be a victim of gaslighting regardless of gender. So the manipulative technique of gaslighting can be attempted by anyone, but it only tends to be successful when someone has a lot of power over an individual for whatever reason. Gaslighting has been looked at amongst domestic violence survivors in a study where 2,500 domestic abuse victims were asked, did your ex-partner ever do things on purpose that you felt were aimed at trying to make you feel like you were going crazy? An alarming 74% of those domestic violence victims answered yes in that research. Fortunately, gaslighting was made an official part of criminal domestic violence law in 2015 in the UK. So now victims of domestic violence are actually protected more in terms of this abuse tactic. How do you prevent gaslighting from taking place? Well, in relation to preventing gaslighting, you have to see and understand your own role in gaslighting. The people who are going to allow gaslighting to happen will probably idolize in some way or really value the person who's actually performing the gaslighting. So perhaps you might feel the need to be validated or approved by the person who's gaslighting you. Perhaps you might look up to them, idolize them, put them on a pedestal, really want to be accepted by them. And therefore, you might accept some of their harsh words or their mistreatment of you. So once you recognize that need to be approved and that excessive need for validation, it will definitely help you from realizing that gaslighting is taking place and feeling stronger to be able to walk away from it. How do you deal with gaslighting? You have to see the gaslighting, you have to recognize it, see it for what it is, and you have to hold on to your own reality and your own beliefs and your own opinions, even if you don't feel like the strong one in this interaction. Hold on to your reality, do not let go of that, and essentially walk away from this relationship. If you see that gaslighting has taken place, if you feel that that's what's happening, don't try to argue your point. That's never going to work here. A person who's narcissistic is not ever going to take on your point of view or care about your beliefs, your feelings, the way that you see things. So don't try and stay and fight your corner. You essentially need to recognize that gaslighting is taking place and step back and walk away from this relationship or this situation. So the common thing that's happening when someone is being gaslit is they're being told that their feelings don't matter, their perception is wrong, they should think in a certain way, the narcissistic gaslighter is correct, and they should be led and guided by them in terms of what they should believe and their perception. So this leads particularly someone who's quite vulnerable into questioning their own mind, their own perception, their own reality, and in the most extreme cases, someone may be even pushed to question their own sanity. If you have been a victim of gaslighting, if you want to share some of these examples with me, please leave a comment in the description below. I would like to actually hear about some other situations that people have been in relation to gaslighting. If you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to press the bell icon where you can be notified of other videos that I make.